when you work in your dissertation, sometimes it starts off one way and it ends up a totally different way. And because I was actually on the continent, it just took it a totally different way that it would have never got that way had I not lived on the continent, had I not read scholarly works from that perspective, and had I not been able to like interview people and talk to descendants for months at a time.
Welcome to Profound Conversations, a dynamic broadcast platform focused on building healthy communities. In an ever-evolving world, new ideas and transformative ways of being are the lights at the end of the tunnel.
This is Dr. Mawata Sankara, and this is Profound Conversations, where we have conversations about things that are meaningful to us, about things that actually impact our lives in most profound ways. Conversations become profound not because they start off that way, but because people have passion around what they talk about. And as a result, we begin to understand the profundity, what it means to be and to become. Dr. Slater, welcome to Profound Conversations.
Thank you so much. What an honor and blessing to be here today. Thank you.
We know that you are a scholar. We know that you are a travel person. You know that you have lived experiences in various places. We know that you have a historical discourse around this issue of genocide and the destruction of human populations. We know that you understand the idea of memory and erasure and accountability. We know that you see certain things happen in the past and they're happening in the present. Talk to us, share with us, how did you get into this space where you understood, studied, researched on the continent of Africa, this idea of genocide and the inhumanity of man to man?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. So my journey started back when I was in high school. Actually, I was trying to get to college. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I was the first generation. No one in the family's ever been to college before, and so I was trying to figure out a way to get to college. And when going around the family, there was nobody offered any way to get to college. And so one of the things that I decided to do at the time was join the military. So I was after high school. I think it was a week after I graduated from high school. I was only 17. And my mother had to sign me into the military because I was so young at that time, and went to the army, joined the army a week after high school, and went through basic and AIT, and then they sent me to Germany, and so I did 2 years in the military, and then from there I went to HBCU, Morris Brown College. But before I got there, while I was in Germany, this is where pretty much my whole trajectory kind of took a turn. I was on a weekend pass, and during this weekend pass, I went to one of the museums, and in the museum, they had these two skulls in the museum, and as I'm looking at the skulls, one of the things that I was just shocked by is that there was a little notice that said, it was like kind of like a little tag next to the skull, and it said, male skull, male human skull, female human skull, and that these skulls were from Namibia. And there was an Afro-German brother standing in back of me, and he said, do you know about Namibian genocide? No. Like I said, I was only 17. Do you know about Black people in the Holocaust? No. And so this opened up like a whole world because during high school I was we just learned about Anne Frank and just traditional Holocaust teachings, but never did I know anything about our people participating in the Holocaust. I didn't know about the Tuskegee Airmen had a role during the Holocaust. I didn't know that there was a event that preceded the Holocaust. So the Namibian genocide actually took place before the Holocaust, and the events that happened within that segment led to some of the events that happened in the Holocaust, which I'll talk about a little later. And so after I got out the military, I said, I was really hyped up to go to college. I went to Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia. I majored in political science and history. Then from there, I went to St. Edward's University. I got my master's in humanities with a focus on social justice, and then PhD work that focused on comparative genocide from Salve Regina University. So that's how I kind of got to this point, and really have been doing the work in higher ed for 20 years as a various different things as a assistant associate professor, currently as the chair of humanities, philosophy, and religious studies. But I worked on both the academic side and the student affairs side within higher ed. But in every role, one of the things I had to make sure is that every role that I served was to make sure that all students benefit, but more importantly, African American students within these spaces. And so this is how I got to this point, and this is how I came to do the work in genocide. And one of the things that I'm really thankful for is that my dissertation expanded what was previously known as the Herero and Nama genocide, because this event was always called Herero and Nama genocide, but my work expanded that. So, and I didn't know until I actually lived on the continent. So I was originally trying to just, while I was working at Quinsigamond Community College, I was about to go on sabbatical just for like maybe a month or two to go to Namibia. But the way it worked out was I eventually got a job with Augsburg University, the Center for Global Education, working with study abroad in Namibia. And so that was perfect. So I lived and worked there. And in the process of actually living there, when you work in your dissertation, sometimes it starts off one way and it ends up a totally different way. And because I was actually on the continent, it just took it a totally different way that it would have never got that way had I not lived on the continent, had I not read scholarly works from that perspective, and had I not been able to interview people and talk to descendants for months at a time. And one of the things that I found out was that we had it all wrong. It wasn't it wasn't Nama Herero genocide, but it was more like Nama, Damara, San people, Ovambo genocide, because they were all a part of the genocide. And so my work kind of focuses on that, and also focuses on the memorialization. Like, how do we do proper memorialization of these events after they happen? Do we have to rely on, in this case, the Germans to provide that memorialization? Or can we set our own tone like they did in Rwanda? So Rwanda, they took the narrative, on themselves and really created a kind of a narrative that wanted to tell the story from an educational point of view, so this won't happen again. Whereas in Namibia, it took on a very colonized version of memorialization, which I'll get into later in the talk. So that's how I got to where I am today.
17 years old.
17.
No options but the military. Mother signs you up. You go to Germany and you see the Germans memorializing their destruction of a population by having two skulls there, and say, behold, the skull of a man and a woman from Namibia. Open the doorways to consciousness to understand something else. And now here you are, you've unpacked this deep narrative. And I'm sure most of us have never heard of the Herero Nama San discussion, the genocide, not even aware of the German conversation and Africans in the so-called Jewish Holocaust, not having any clue about the fact that it's important to recognize and memorialize these particular realities, because in that acknowledgement is power. And so, wow, I can't even tell you where where we need to really begin this conversation. But I want to pull back and get into, what was your impression when you saw those skulls there and you heard the voice saying, do you know what this is? What was your impression? What did you feel in that moment? Not just simply what you thought. What did you feel, Dr. Slater?
It was very chilling at 17, just looking at that, first of all. So I look at it from two perspectives. The event itself, like looking at a case with two skulls in it, knowing that, and they were decapitated skulls too. So the first impression that I had was like, wow, how did this happen? The fact that these skulls are African, I was just like really in shock at 17. Like, how did this happen, and how do I not know about it? And And one of the things that really came up, which is really took the premise of like why I got into teaching in the first place, is that I realized at that point that I went to a Catholic school, 12 years of Catholic school, and got a very watered down Eurocentric history. And this just validated all of that. This just validated that I wasn't getting taught the history of our people, but I had to take some ownership. Like, okay, so from here, how can I tell this narrative? Because I know that this was not taught back in the U.S.
Hmm.
So how can I grab this narrative and then run with it? And part of that quote unquote running with it was to be educated myself. And so that's when I kind of that's part one. The other part is that opened my, again, I'm 17, I'm in Germany. I didn't even know that there was Black people outside of my space, and so being able to see Black people in the UK, Germany, it was a mind-blowing experience. And it taught me the value of travel, that history is not only taught in a book, but like travel will open up history, doors that you would have never imagined that you can open, because we're only getting history from one perspective in the US. But when you go and get other works from African writers and African historians, African philosophers, it just opens up a whole new world of discussion that, I just at that time I just said, you know what if how can I bring this information back and it'll benefit people like myself as a young person? And that's what I thought at that time.
Wow. This movement, travel, so I'm taken back because travel does change your perspective, right? And so one person should say that you increase your perspectives in life by increasing your travels, right? So you can have a different perspective. Uh, so teaching, so I like what you said about once you got the narrative, once you got the school conversation and how it got there, you felt responsible to share that information so that somebody else's life could be changed.
No doubt.
What did you want people to know, right? Did you want to go tell somebody? What did you want to tell somebody? What were you really feeling? Why was it important to teach and to tell this story?
Yeah, I feel like it was really important to tell that story because, excuse me, the narrative that we've been taught. I mean, well, first of all, with regards to the so-called Holocaust, I remember learning about the Holocaust. Probably it goes back to like fourth and fifth grade, and
Hmm.
so the indoctrination of Holocaust
Hmm.
runs deep, you know, and and it not only does it run deep, but our story is totally left out of it, out of the Holocaust itself. We're not even going to talk about Namibia, but out of the Holocaust itself, because in the Holocaust, you have the Tuskegee Airmen that played a part during the Holocaust. Within the Holocaust itself, you had POWs that were African American during that time. You had entertainers that were in Germany at the time that were taken as captive POW. You had forces that were African forces that were fighting on behalf of different francophone countries that were also captured and put into like POW camps as well. And so none of that was relayed in high school at all. And so to me, I mean, I think that it's very important that when we talk about history, it's not just his story, right? It's, you have to make it a history that is inclusive of what the true event is. And so that's where I was coming from with that. And one of the
Mm.
things one of the things I want to add though is that in learning all of this, I started seeing a common denominator. Like,
Hmm.
for example, like looking at the Burundi genocide, because not too many people know about the Burundi genocide, which preceded the Rwanda genocide. But if you look at Burundi, then you look at Rwanda, and then you look at Namibia, one of the things that they all have in common is Germany. Like Burundi, after the Berlin Conference, they carved up what was called German East Africa, and Burundi and Rwanda was a part of the German peace at that time. Then you had German Southwest Africa, which would be Namibia. And so with that, the Germans brought this idea of eugenics and white superiority, and they included that into an African space. How so? Well, so when we look at like Rwanda, for example, like when the Germans got there, they took these groups, right? So you had the Tutsi. I'm just using Rwanda as an example. Tutsi, the Twa, and then Hutu. And what the Germans did was they started to differentiate. Like, okay, so this group Tutsi looks more Eurocentric, so we're going to put them into positions of power, even though they're the minority group. Coming from outside of the space of where Burundi and Rwanda is, and we're gonna give this minority group power over this larger majority of Hutu. And so so um, when we talk about like how these tribal wars happen, on the surface, it just we just think that something occurred between these two groups. But when you look at the beginning process of it, it all goes back to Germany in the case of Burundi and Rwanda, and then with Rwanda, once it was out of Germany's hands and into the hands of Brussels, then the Belgians, what they did was they started to categorize who's who. Like for example, you had the Tutsi. If you were a Tutsi, then you had more than 10 cows. So that's how they would reframe like who's Tutsi or not. Then a Hutu would be those that had like less than 10 cows. And so that's how they started categorizing folks and separating, creating like a divide and conquer situation. And they did this in Namibia as well. And so yes, my work is this it's really getting to the root of like why these genocides happen and how to prevent, if possible, how to prevent genocides moving forward.
Mm. I was thinking about how did you get to this conversation, and you went into what the conversation was about, right? This the common denominator being this oppressive force. You mentioned the Germans. The common denominator being Europeans being divisive, excluding information of populations. You mentioned your experience in the Roman Catholic school and how you did not receive certain information because it was a Eurocentric curriculum, which also creates a divisiveness within the mind that suggests that somehow being Black or African means that there's some level of inferiority and being European is superiority. And it's very similar to what you are closing out with here with the Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa discourse about a divisiveness that occurs between people. W.B. Du Bois talks about the double consciousness idea. And so what we see in here is that this is a common process of creating a narrative of inferiority and superiority for domination and control. However, what you present is this other thing. This other thing is that if we know the history, if we know the truth, if we know the nuances of the conversation, if we know where we fit into the conversation, if we know our position, our place in it, if we understand our real power, it changes how we see ourselves. I mean, that's what I'm getting from this. And so at
Yeah.
17, you made a decision, you had a commitment to be able to tell the story, to say that in this particular photo album, you are here. And you didn't know that you were all over, right? If I hand you a photo album and I suggest to you that to look at this photo album and you would look at it with minimum concern. But if I tell you that inside of this photo album are some pictures of you and your family, you're going to slow down and look at it more with more intentionality because you want to see exactly where are you, what page am I on? And so when you went and you saw that memorialization of the desecration of a population in Germany, it triggered this idea that you have a story to tell. That is profoundly powerful. Your narrative is what it is, and so now you're on this pathway. You are a professor. You are teaching. You're unpacking the conversation of genocide. Your dissertation has changed how the genocide is looked upon, the Herero Nama genocide. Uh, your work right now. How do you use that 17-year-old experience to influence change in your current work right now?
Yes. Several ways. And one of the things that I failed to mention earlier is that when I lived in Namibia, I actually got a chance to, this is while I was working on my dissertation, well, actually, no. This is, I had already defended, and then I had the good fortune of sharing my dissertation with members of the Herero tribal council, and they had me be a part of the memorialization committee while I was there. So that's like a dream come true to see like my work actually come to fruition. And one of the things that happened in Namibia is that, they had all types of memorials that were there. For example, you had the memorial in which that's located at the it's not a campground, but it was like more of it was a concentration camp, and it was a former concentration camp. And then at this concentration camp, it was a burial ground, and on the burial ground they had like this large plaque that said, here lies Nama and Herero. They died of unknown circumstances, which historically couldn't be further from the truth. And so one of the things that we did is that they used a lot of my research and research that was already out there, but brought it all together, and then we were able to really get some momentum and change that memorial. Instead of saying we have no idea how these people were killed, now it says exactly how they were killed. People were raped, tortured, they died here, at the hands of their German captors. And so that's what it currently says. And so that's the type of work that, I mean, it came out of like that 17-year-old, that enlightenment that I had from that point on, evolved into the point where I was able to make that type of change in Namibia itself. Now there's still a lot of work to go. I mean, there was a statue of Kurt von Francois, who was an early general in Namibia. He was a colonial general, and he was being credited as the founder of Windhoek, which is the capital of Namibia. And through a lot of these changes, not of my own, but like after the plaque was changed, there was a lot of momentum to change the narrative of a lot of these memorials. And then even that statue was removed because that was not the founder of Windhoek. The founder of Windhoek was Jonica Afrikaner, who was a Nama tribe member. And so like these types of movements happen, not all as a part of the work that I was doing, but in part it contributed to the greater good. And then like currently, I did want to say this too, is that as a department chair, we oversee like a lot of the course material that comes into play, add courses, take out courses, etc. And one of the things that I'm really, really proud of the work that we're doing is we kind of revamped a Holocaust studies course that, originally just had like the Holocaust piece to it, but then we expanded it to include Rwandan genocide, Namibian genocide, and really tell our stories within the framework of Holocaust studies, Holocaust and genocide studies. And so, that's what I'm doing within my purview, and I feel really good about the work.
So the storyline is that you have had an experience, someone who could not figure out how to get to college, to being one who has impacted an entire country from just one inquiry. And that inquiry is, what would happen if this story gets told another way? What would happen if someone knew of the atrocities that took place? What would happen if one understood who they really were? I think that is profound. That is why this is profound conversation. That is profound. We have to explore more about your dissertation that looks at the correct naming of the founder of Windhoek, the corrective narrative that talks about the story of who lived and died, the correct narrative around were they colonizers, were they tormentors, the conversation about the Third Reich movement that gained its insight from the eugenics discourse that was going on with Charles Darwin, Herbert Spencer, and Sir Francis Galton in England that talked about this issue of good stock. And so the Third Reich movement saw that as something that they could utilize and talk about the good stock and said that certain populations should be sterilized and certain populations should be allowed to continue to procreate. And that becomes this conversation, which is something that they begin to use as propaganda to destroy a population. Dr. Slater, I want to thank you for being a part of this segment of Profound Conversations. Is there something that you want to say in closing out this segment about a person who saw something and then thought it not robbery to engage in the conversation about sharing it with others to know about your power and prowess? What do you want to close out with in this segment?
Yeah, so I just wanted to close out very quickly is that, like we don't do none of this on our own. And along the way, I had so many mentors that were able to kind of cultivate and bring out like the fact that, this was important work. Because, along the way, there were many people that were telling me, man, just focus on African American history parts 1 and 2, because I've taught African American history parts 1 and 2 for a while, and early Southern African history as well. But many people tried to discourage and just say you just focus on African American history 1 and 2. And had it not been for like positive mentors and even myself, the energy that I had within myself, but other people that saw like the importance of the work, maybe this work may not have came to fruition. So I just want to like give a shout out to those, and it was many, those along the way that were able to like help that in that cultivation.
That's powerful. Dr. Slater says that we must know that we are always pouring into others, and we never know where that narrative is going to move. And as we pour into others, we're building for eternity. We must recognize our obligation and duty to tell the story, to have a corrective narrative of truth, to empower all that have been impacted by one particular experience. And when we tell that particular story from various perspectives, we have a clearer understanding of what it is that we are encountering in the here and now. Dr. Slater, thank you so much for being a part of this segment of Profound Conversations.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, brother.
Thank you for joining our Profound Conversation. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our podcast and then gift this information to a friend or family member using the share button. You can find our show on all social media platforms as well as on our website at profoundconvos.com.